The desert burned. Not from the sun. A barn collapsed in flame, black against the night sky, smoke climbing higher than the ridge. One man alone. 2 buckets from the creek. Run. Pour. Run again. Hands blistered. Lungs thick with smoke. The fire still rising. Then hoofbeats. From the dark to the north. Fast. Urgent. Not help. He didn't think. Swung onto the bareback horse. No saddle. No time. Charged into the night. The gap closed under cold stars. A figure ahead, swaying. He grabbed the collar. 2 bodies slammed into the dry ground. A ragged breath. Eyes wide and white. Who sent you? The fire still burned behind them. The earth cracked under their backs. And the answer had not yet left the throat. The heat came first. Before the sound. Before anything else. It pressed down on Arizona territory the way it always did in July, flat and relentless, cracking the red earth into wide seams like something trying to break open from underneath. Emery Calloway had been awake since before dawn. Not because he wanted to be. Because the cattle near the eastern fence line had been restless since midnight, and restless cattle meant trouble, and trouble was his job to find. He was 27 years old. He had been doing this kind of work since he was 16. Most mornings that felt about right. Except this morning didn't feel right. Not from the start. Something in the air. Something in the way the birds had gone quiet an hour back, and hadn't started up again. He rode the fence line slow. Chalk beneath him, steady as ever, ears twitching at something Emery couldn't hear yet. Good horse. Paid more for him 3 years back than he could reasonably afford, and never regretted it once. Chalk didn't spook at nothing. Didn't waste himself on things that didn't matter. So when Chalk stopped, Emery sat up straighter. The land dipped there, just past the northern ridge, into a shallow basin, where a rock face rose maybe 8 feet, throwing shadow even this early. Emery squinted into it. Nothing. Just shadow and heat shimmer, and the pale scrub that passed for grass this time of year. Then something moved. Not the shadow. Something in it. He clicked his tongue, pressed his knee into Chalk's flank, and they went forward slow. Careful. The way you approach anything in this country that might still be alive, and might still be dangerous, because out here those 2 things weren't opposites. They were cousins. Closer now. And the shape resolved into something that made his stomach drop clean through the saddle. A woman. Young. Lying on her side against the rock, one arm folded beneath her, the other stretched across the dirt like she'd been reaching for something, and the reaching had stopped her. He was off the horse before he decided to be. Boots loud on purpose. Hands open. Because if she woke and saw a stranger looming, that would be the last thing she needed. He'd seen enough startled animals to know what fear does to a body already spent. She was Apache. He could see that before he was even close. The stitching on her clothes. Small, careful, geometric, red and black thread worked into the hem like a signature. Her hair dark and braided, half undone now, dust ground into it. And the blood. A dark stain, spreading from beneath her ribs on the right side. Soaked through. Dried black at the edges, where it had been going for hours already. He crouched beside her. Didn't touch yet. Just looked. Catalogued. Entry wound low on the ribs. Exit, he couldn't tell. She was on her side, and he wasn't moving her blind. Her breathing. Shallow. Uneven. The kind of breathing a body does, when it's spending everything it has left just to keep going. He pressed 2 fingers to her wrist. A pulse. Weak. Too fast. But there. Alive. For now. Here is where a different man might have stopped to think it through. Might have waited. Because Arizona territory in 1883 did not reward a man who found an Apache woman shot and bleeding and decided, out loud, in front of witnesses, to help her. There had been raids. Reprisals for the raids. Reprisals for the reprisals. The whole ugly wheel of it, turning for longer than Emery had been alive, and everybody in the territory left, with raw nerves, and a short reach for whatever weapon sat closest. Helping her could cost him his job, his standing, such as it was. Maybe worse. He thought about all of it. For about 4 seconds. Then he took off his coat, and laid it over her, because the sun was already starting to climb, and shock kills, as quick as blood loss if you let it. Getting her onto chalk was harder than he expected. She wasn't small. Maybe 5'5", lean but solid, the kind of build that comes from real work, not idleness. Unconscious weight doesn't sit right. It shifts. Fights you without meaning to. He got her up eventually. Held her in front of him in the saddle, her back against his chest, his arm braced across her to keep her steady. Her head tipped. He adjusted it against his shoulder, so her neck wasn't at an angle that would cause more damage than the bullet already had. Chalk moved without being told twice. Good horse. 20 minutes back to the cabin, and Emery kept the pace slow the whole way. Didn't rush. Rushing would jostle her, and jostling would tear open whatever had started to clot, and he was not going to be the reason that happened. He thought about practical things, because thinking about anything else was a door he wasn't ready to open. Boiled water. Clean cloth. Whether he still had that shirt he kept for going into town, the one he called clean, though clean was a generous word for it by now. Whether the bullet was still inside her. Whether he had any business at all trying to deal with that if it was. One problem at a time. That was the only way through anything out here. You didn't solve the whole territory in the morning. You solved the fence post in front of you. He laid her on the cot in the corner of the one-room cabin. Lit the lamp even, though it was daylight outside, because the light in here never seemed to reach the corners right. Got a proper look at her for the first time. 22, maybe? Strong features. Broad forehead. A jaw set even now, even unconscious, like her body hadn't gotten the message that she could stop fighting for a minute. There was something in her face that wasn't defeat. Wasn't fear, even. Just absence. Like she'd stepped out of herself for a while and fully intended to come back and settle the account later. He started with the wound. Entry below the right ribs, slightly toward the back. He found the exit too, smaller than he expected, which told him the bullet had slowed considerable before it left her, which meant it had done its worst work somewhere in between, somewhere he couldn't see, and couldn't fix, and could only hope her body had the strength to handle on its own. He cleaned both wounds with the cleanest water he had. Applied pressure until the bleeding slowed to something he could work with. Wrapped her ribs tight, with strips of that not quite clean shirt, because it was the closest thing to a bandage he owned. Then he sat back on his heels. Looked at her. She needs water when she wakes. She's been out there long enough to be dry, as the ground she was lying on. He set a tin cup within reach of the cot. Moved to the table. Saturday. And watched her breathe. She woke 4 hours later. He knew because he hadn't slept. Hadn't tried. Just sat there, and listened to her breathing change, slow, from the shallow scramble of a body fighting to something deeper. Something that might, if he was lucky, be called rest. When her eyes opened, they went straight to him. And the fear in them, he'd seen fear before. Animals cornered. Men caught in a lie. This wasn't that. This was older than the moment. Trained into her by something specific, something that lived close to the surface of her now, ready at all times. She tried to sit up. The pain stopped her cold. She pressed a hand to her side, made a sound, not quite a cry, shorter than that, something she swallowed, before it fully left her, and went still. Easy, Emery said. He didn't move toward her. Stayed at the table. Easy. Nobody's moving you around. She stared. Breathing fast again. I'm not going to hurt you, he said. That's not a thing I do. She said something back. Fast. Sharp syllables in a language he didn't know. But the tone. Unmistakable. Not pleading. Not begging. Telling him something. A warning. Or an accusation. He couldn't say which. I don't speak your language, he said. I'm sorry for that. She kept watching. He pointed at the cup by the cot. She looked at it. Looked back at him. He stayed where he was. After a long moment, she reached. Slow. Testing how much the movement cost her, before she committed to it. She got the cup. Drank. Stopped herself before she drank too much. That told him something. Told him she was thinking clearly even now, even hurt, even scared half to nothing. That was a good sign. Maybe the only good sign he had. There's more, he said. When you're ready. She set the cup down. Watched him with eyes that were tired in a way that went past physical. Neither of them said anything else that night. He didn't ask her what happened, who shot her, why she'd been alone out there bleeding, into the red dirt. Those were questions that could wait. She needed rest more than she needed an interrogation, and a scared person answering questions in a language they didn't fully own. That was a way to make things worse, not better. He heated up what he had. Beans, a little salt pork, nothing to be proud of. Set a bowl near the cot. She looked at it a long time, before she touched it. Ate slow. Kept her eyes on him more than the food. He ate at the table. Outside, the desert did what deserts do at night, dropped 40 degrees in an hour, filled up with sounds that only exist in the dark. Coyote somewhere off to the west. Wind working through dry brush like something looking for a way in. He pulled his bedroll out, from under the cot, which meant getting closer to her than either of them liked, and set it up by the stove. I'll be there, he said, pointing. You need anything. She watched him lie down. Somewhere past midnight, still half certain she'd slip out, into the dark the second his eyes closed, he finally slept. She was still there in the morning. The days arranged themselves after that. Slow at first. Careful. 3 days. Then 4. She started eating more. Color came back, into her face like something being switched on in stages. The wound was healing, he could tell by the way she moved, a fraction more free each day, a little less careful, with her right side. She stayed watchful. That never left entirely. But the fear started changing shape. First 2 days, she'd flinch when he moved too fast near her. Went rigid when he had to check the dressing. He learned to announce everything. Before he did it, pointed at the bandage, then at the supplies, gave her the moment she needed to brace. By the 5th day, she'd stopped flinching. Still watched him. But the watching had changed. Less defense in it. More something else. Evaluation, maybe? Like she was making up her mind about something, and hadn't landed yet. The language between them was a strange, slow thing. She had some English, he found that out on the 3rd night, when he knocked a cup reaching for the pitcher, and she said, quiet, no urgency to it at all. Careful. Just the one word. He looked at her. She looked back. He righted the cup. Thank you, he said. She didn't answer that one. But over the following days more words showed up. Spent carefully, like she had a limited supply, and was deciding which ones were worth the cost. Cold, one night when the temperature dropped hard. Better, when he asked how her side was doing, and then she looked briefly annoyed at herself for answering, so plainly, like she hadn't meant to give him that much. He didn't push. He offered words back. Pointed at things. The stove. The window. Chalk visible through the open door. Didn't turn it into a lesson. Just laid the words down between them, and let her pick up whatever she wanted. She picked up more than she let on. He was fairly sure of that. On the 7th morning he came back, from the early water check, and found a fire already going in the stove. She sat near it, back straight despite everything, hands working at something he couldn't identify at first. Strips of fabric. From her own ruined clothing, the parts too torn to save, saved anyway, repurposed. Her fingers moved fast. Sure. The motion of someone who'd done this 10,000 times before. He sat at the table. Watched. She worked another 20 minutes, without acknowledging him, and he found he didn't mind that at all. There was something in it. Something calming about watching hands that knew exactly what they were doing in a world that mostly didn't. Then she stopped. Looked at what she'd made. Set it on the table in front of him. A bracelet. Small. Tight woven. Red and black thread in a pattern that repeated all the way around. He picked it up. Put it on. It fit. She glanced at his wrist. Then away, fast, like she hadn't meant to look that long. And for just a second, there and gone, the corner of her mouth moved upward. Not a smile. The beginning of one. Emery thought he had never in his life seen anything start so quiet and mean so much. This is where things should have stayed simple. Except nothing out here stayed simple. Not for long. It was the 9th morning when he found the mark. He was clearing the table, reaching for the plate she'd left, and she moved her hand too quick, a fraction late to catch it, and her sleeve, his spare shirt, the one he'd wrapped her in, that first night, shifted up her forearm. A tattoo. Not decoration. Not anything casual. A series of small, precise marks arranged in a pattern he'd seen exactly once before. 2 summers back. An older Apache man he'd worked alongside briefly at a different outfit further south. He'd asked about it then. The man hadn't answered. But a woman at the trading post in Bisbee had. Later. Told him what it meant. That mark. That exact arrangement. Belonged to the family line of Taji, the man who led the Copper Spring Band. Emery set the plate down. Careful. Like the table itself might crack if he moved too fast. Because the Copper Spring Band wasn't just any band. They were the center of the biggest land dispute in 3 counties. The one everybody talked about at the feed store in low voices, and then changed the subject when a stranger walked in. The Copper Spring territory sat over a water source. And that water source sat directly in the path of a railroad contract that Silas Merrow, the man who'd arrived in Tucson 2 years back, with money and lawyers, and a talent for making land disappear, through paperwork that looked legal, until you read it slow, wanted more than he wanted almost anything else. Merrow wanted that land. And someone had shot this girl. Emery sat down slow at the table. Looked at his coffee like it might have answers in it. She wasn't a stranger passing through. Wasn't some accident of geography. She was the daughter of the one man standing between Silas Merrow and everything he wanted. Which meant the men who'd shot her weren't finished. Which meant they might still be looking. He said nothing about it to her. Not because he was hiding it. Because, what was there to say? You're more than I thought you were. The man who might have tried to kill you is the most powerful man in this county. And I'm a cowboy, with $40 a month, and a cabin that isn't even mine. He said nothing. Went about the day's work instead. Left her with water, and food within reach, and the door latched, no lock, he'd never needed one before, but latched, so nothing could push through without meaning to. Worked the fence near the north ridge, until his hands ached in a way that felt honest. Came back at noon. Found her asleep. But a different kind of sleep than before. Less like a body at the edge of its limits. More like actual rest. Good, he thought. Good. He ate at the table. Didn't wake her. That night, once the lamp was low, and the desert outside had gone into its full black quiet, he sat at the table, with a piece of paper and a stub of pencil, and thought about his father. Because that's what this kind of thing did to him. Pulled the old thread loose. His father had been a good man. Not a lucky one. Those two things don't always travel together, and in Emery's family they never had. Texas. 15 years back now. A land company, smooth men in good coats, papers that read one way in the parlor, and meant something else entirely in the county office, had taken the family's acreage clean, through a transfer nobody in the family had actually agreed to. Took it the way water takes sand. Slow, and then all at once, and by the time you noticed, there wasn't anything left to stand on. His father had fought it. Wrote letters. Rode into town more times than Emery could count, hat in hand, asking men who already knew the answer to just please look at the deed again. Nobody looked again. His father died 2 years after that, in a rented room, of nothing the doctor could properly name. Emery had always believed, still believed, that a man could die of having the ground taken out from under him just as sure as he could die of a fever. 16 years old. That's how old Emery had been when he buried him. That's when the work started, because work was the only thing that made the world make sense again. So when he looked at the mark on her wrist, and understood what it meant, understood that a rich man's hunger for land had already put a bullet in her once, and would try again, something old in him stood up, and did not sit back down. He didn't decide anything that night. Not exactly. But he stopped pretending, even to himself, that this was simple. The 10th day, she asked him a question he wasn't ready for. They were sitting outside in the thin shade under the overhang, her favoring her side still, but sitting up straight anyway, because that seemed to be a thing she refused to give up on. Your family, she said. Slow. Careful with the words, the way she was careful, with everything now. Where? He turned his cup in his hands. East Texas, he said. Not there anymore. Why? He looked out at the flat land. Nothing left there. My father passed. Land went with him. Long story. She was quiet a moment. Land, she said. Not a question exactly. More like she was turning the word over, checking its weight. Yeah, he said. Land? She looked at him then. Really looked. Like something in what he'd said had clicked into place next to something she already knew about herself, about her own family, about the specific shape of losing ground you were born standing on. I know that, she said finally. That kind of losing. He nodded. Didn't ask her to say more. She wasn't ready, and neither, if he was honest, was he. But something had shifted between them. A door that had been shut a crack now stood a little wider. She started teaching him things after that. Not on purpose, exactly, or maybe entirely on purpose, he couldn't always tell with her. She'd point at the rock formation to the east, and say a word in her language. He'd repeat it back wrong. She'd make a small sound, close to amusement, and say it again slower. He tried again. Closer this time. She tipped her head, just slightly. Not a nod. Something subtler. An acknowledgement that he was paying attention. He started keeping a scrap of paper in his shirt pocket. Wrote the words down at night, phonetic, in a hand that wasn't much better than a child's scrawl. He didn't show her this. Wasn't sure why. Maybe because it felt like admitting to something he wasn't ready to name yet. In trade, he showed her what he knew. How to read the land for water by what grew where. How the horses told you weather was coming, before the sky did. How to set a fence post in hard ground, with the tools you actually had instead of the ones you wished for. She listened to all of it, with that same careful, measuring attention. And sometimes she'd correct him. Point to 3 other signs he'd miss for reading water, her gestures doing the explaining her English couldn't quite manage yet. He wrote those down too. It was the 12th evening, when he finally asked. They were sitting outside, the heat finally letting go of the day, the first stars coming up hard, and closed the way they did out here. She was working thread between her fingers, not making anything in particular, just keeping her hands busy the way some people breathed. I don't know your name, he said. She looked up. Something crossed her face, surprise maybe, that it had taken him this long to ask, or that he'd waited for her to be ready instead of just asking outright on day one. Tawny, she said. He said it back. Careful. Got it close on the first try. Tawny, he said again, like he wanted to make sure it would stay. Emery, she said. not a question. She'd clearly known his name a while, overheard it, maybe, the way a person overhears things in a cabin they're too weak to leave. Yeah, he said. Emery. Something passed between them then, that didn't need more words. A door, finally, all the way open. Tawny, he said a third time, quieter, mostly to himself. She almost smiled at that. Didn't quite. But almost. The afternoons were the hardest part. Heat at its worst. Work mostly done. Nothing left to do, but sit with the fact that there was a woman in his cabin, that a powerful man was hunting, and that every day that continued was a day things could get significantly worse. He was not a man who panicked easy. But he was a man who thought clear enough to know when he was standing on ground that could give way. The 13th day brought riders. He saw them from 50 yards out. Had time to step inside before they reached the fence. Stay back, he told her. She didn't ask why. Moved to the far corner, away from the window, without a sound. He went out. Met them at the fence post, before they got any closer to the cabin. Afternoon, the lead one said. Pleasant enough voice. Big man, badge on his chest, that Emery didn't recognize. Name's Purdy. Working out of the Marrowland office. Emery said nothing. Waited. We're looking for a missing Apache woman, Purdy went on. Young. Dark hair braided. Might be hurt. You see anything like that through here? No, Emery said. He didn't elaborate. That was the thing about lies, the more words you hung on them, the more places they had to break. One word. Clean. Let the silence do the rest of the work. Purdy looked at him a long moment. Long way out here to work alone. I like the quiet. The second rider, thinner, younger, eyes that moved too much, glanced past Emery toward the cabin. Mind if we look around? I do, Emery said. Don't have water to spare either. Sorry for the trouble. He held Purdy's gaze. Didn't blink first. Purdy smiled slow. All right then. You see anything, you let the Marrow office know. $50 if it helps you remember. I'll keep that in mind, Emery said. He watched them ride off south, until they were nothing but specks in the shimmer. Then he went inside. Tawny was still in the corner. Upright. Alert. She'd positioned herself, so the wall was at her back, and she had a clear line to the door. They're gone, he said. She looked at him. And there was something new in her face. Not gratitude exactly. Closer to recognition. The look of someone who'd been told a thing about a man, and had just watched it turn out to be true. That night, colder than usual, when doing that long low thing it did, through the canyon country, she spoke first. Why? One word. He understood the whole question in it. He turned his cup. Because it was right, he said. They offered money, she said. I heard 50. I heard that too. She was quiet a moment. Why? She said again. Fair question, the second time around. He thought about how to answer. About the $40 a month, and the cabin, that wasn't his, and the fact that there was no reason at all for him to make an enemy of the most powerful man in the territory, over a woman he barely knew. Where I come from, he said finally. You don't hand somebody over who came to you hurt. She studied him. Where is that? Small town in East Texas, he said. Not there anymore. Told you. Nothing left. She let the silence today, while after that. Didn't push. He was grateful for it. The days kept moving. 14th. 15th. Her English got sharper by increments. His grasp of her words did too, slow, stumbling, but real. Something was building between them in the space the language couldn't fill, something built instead out of watching, and small corrections, and the particular quiet of two people who decided, without saying so, to trust each other, with what they didn't have words for yet. It was the 16th day, when Brennan showed up. Hollis Brennan owned the spread Emery worked. Not the land Emery's cabin sat on now, that would come years later, but the outfit that paid his $40 a month, and called the arrangement fair. Emery had worked for him going on 6 years. Never had cause to doubt the man. Brennan wasn't warm, exactly. But he paid on time, and in this territory, that counted for something close to loyalty. Brennan rode up alone, mid-afternoon, and something in the set of his shoulders told Emery, before a single word passed between them, that this wasn't a friendly visit. Ron, Brennan said, old habit, he still called Emery by his middle name sometimes, from back when they'd first met and gotten it mixed up. We need to talk. All right. Brennan glanced toward the cabin. Didn't ask outright. Didn't need to. Purdy came by my place yesterday, Brennan said. Asking questions. Said there's talk you might know something about a missing girl. I told him no. I know what you told him. Brennan's jaw worked. Look. I've got dead on this outfit. You know that. Bank in Tucson's been on me 2 seasons running. Emery felt something cold settle low in his gut. What did you tell him, Hollis? Brennan didn't answer right away. And in the not answering, Emery got his answer. I didn't say you had her. Brennan said too fast. I just said you'd been quiet lately. Said your fence work's been slower than usual near the cabin. That's all I said? That's all you said? Emery's voice went flat. It clears part of what I owe, Brennan said. And there it was, not shame in his voice, exactly. Something worse. Relief. The specific relief of a man who has already decided a thing is done, and is only now getting around to explaining it. Ron. You understand. A man's got to look out for his own. Emery looked at him a long moment. Thought about his father. About smooth men in good coats, and papers that read different depending on who is reading them. He thought, this is how it starts. Not with a gun. With a debt. With a man deciding that somebody else's danger is a fair price for his own relief. Get off my land, Emery said. Quiet. It ain't your land, Brennan said. It's mine. Then get off it anyway. Brennan stared at him. Something passed over his face, not quite guilt, not quite defiance. He turned his horse. Merrow's not a man you want against you, Ron, Brennan said, not looking back. Whatever you think you're doing here. He rode off. Emery stood at the fence along, while after the dust settled, hands loose at his sides, jaw tight enough to ache. Because that was the thing about trust. You didn't know the shape of it until it broke. Didn't know how much weight you'd put on it until the floor gave. He went inside. Tawny was at the table, and she clearly heard enough through the thin cabin walls to understand the shape of it, even if she'd missed the words. Who? She said. My boss, Emery said. Sat down heavy. Man I've worked for 6 years. He told them. Yeah. She was quiet. Watching him with an expression he was starting to know well, the one that meant she was filing something away, adding it to whatever careful accounting she kept of the world, and who could be trusted in it. You're not surprised, Emery said. Something in his voice he didn't intend, bitterness, maybe, or the beginning of it. No, she said. Simple. Not cruel. Just true. Men trade what's easy to trade. Dead is easy. People are cheaper. He looked at her. Something in the flatness of the statement, the lack of any self-pity in it, told him this wasn't philosophy for her. This was experience. Your people, he said. This has happened before. She didn't answer that directly. Just looked out the window at the darkening yard, at the shape of the fence line going gray in the last light. It always happens before, she said. That's what makes it easy to see coming. And still not enough to stop. They sat with that a while. The lamp burned low. Outside, the wind picked up, doing its long low thing, through the canyon cut, not quite a howl, and not quite anything else. You should leave, Tawny said finally. Before this costs you more. No. Ron. Emery, he said. Nobody calls me Ron but Brennan, and I'm about done answering to it. That got something close to a real smile out of her, brief, there and gone, but real. Emery, she said, testing the shape of it. You should leave anyway. This is not your fight. He looked at her steady. It became my fight the day I got off my horse. She didn't have an answer for that. Just looked at him a long moment, something moving behind her eyes, that he couldn't fully read yet, and wouldn't be able to name for longer still. That night was colder than the others. He added wood to the stove twice. And somewhere past midnight, with the fire down to embers, and the two of them still awake in the particular silence of people who have run out of easy things to say, she spoke again. My father, she said, will already know I'm missing. It has been many days. How many is many? 16, she said. He will have sent riders. Searching. They haven't found this place. No. A pause. Not yet. He understood what she wasn't saying. That the searching itself was dangerous, for her father's people, riding through territory, that men like Merrill watched close, looking for any excuse. When you're strong enough, he said, I'll take you back myself. Whatever that costs. She looked at him for a long time in the low light. You don't know what that costs, she said. Not yet. No, he admitted. I don't. Doesn't change what I said. She didn't answer. But she didn't argue either. And in the space, where the argument should have been, something else sat instead, something neither of them had a word for, in either language, not yet. The 17th day, Purdy came back. Not alone this time. 3 others with him, riding in from the east, which was the direction that didn't lead to any main road, which meant they'd been riding a search pattern, methodical, patient, the way men hunt, when they're being paid to hunt, and not in any particular hurry about it. Emery was at the fence, before they reached it. Afternoon, Purdy said. No pleasantness in it this time. Words got around town that somebody out this way's been sheltering a hostel. Territory law's real clear on the penalty for that. Word's wrong, Emery said. Reward's gone up, Purdy said. $100 now. In case that changes your memory any. It doesn't. Purdy held his gaze 3 long seconds. Exactly 3. Then he turned his horse, and the 4 of them rode east, unhurried, the way men ride, when they know they'll be back. Emery watched until they were gone. Then he went inside. Tawny was standing this time. Not hiding in the corner. Standing at the window, watching the same riders he'd been watching, her jaw set the way it had been, that very first morning he'd found her, unconscious and half dead against the rock, and even then, something in her face refusing to fully surrender. They won't stop, she said. No, he agreed. I have to go, she said. Soon. He didn't argue. Because arguing with a true thing had never been something he had much patience for. Not tonight, he said. You're not strong enough yet. 2 more days, she said. He thought about it. About the riders, about Brennan, about the way trouble in this territory never came alone. It came trailing more trouble behind it, the way one loose thread pulls the whole seam apart, if you're not careful. 2 more days, he agreed. Those 2 days had a different weight to them than the ones before. Because now there was an end point. A known thing coming, and the knowing changed the shape of the time itself, made it heavier, and clearer at once, the way the last hour, before a storm gets very still, and very loud in your own ears. She talked more those 2 days. Not a flood. Not a sudden break, from her careful economy of words. But small pieces, offered instead of extracted. She told him about the plants that held water inside them, the ones her people knew to look for, when the creeks ran dry. About the way her band read weather in the shapes clouds took, rather than which way the wind blew. About a song sung at sunrise that she wouldn't sing for him, not yet, maybe not ever, but described the shape of, the rise and fall of it, with her hands moving like she could conduct the memory into the air between them. He told her more too. About his father. About the particular loneliness of being a man who preferred honesty in a world that mostly didn't return the favor. About Texas, and the smooth men, and the 2 years his father spent writing letters nobody answered, before something in him simply stopped. She listened the way she listened to everything, careful, complete. Didn't offer sympathy. Offered instead something better. Understanding. The kind that comes from a person who has stood in roughly the same place, even if the road there looked different. The night before the second day arrived, either of them slept much. She sat by the window a long while, looking out at the desert dark the way she had, that very first morning, locating herself, maybe, or saying some private goodbye to a particular slice of sky she'd grown used to, without meaning to. He sat at the table. "When they come looking again," she said without turning from the window, "I'll handle it." "You always say that." "It's always been true." She was quiet a moment. Then, "I know why you helped me." He waited. "Because it was right," she said. And the way she said it, it wasn't a question this time. Wasn't even really an echo of what he'd told her before. It was something else. A conclusion. Like she'd been testing a hypothesis this whole time, and had finally gathered enough to call it settled. He didn't know what to say to that. So he said, "Get some sleep." And she almost laughed. Not quite. But almost. In the morning, she was gone. He woke before dawn to a cabin gone too quiet, the cot empty, the door standing a crack open, letting in the cool dark air, and the smell of the desert, before the heat arrived. He lay there a moment. Didn't move. Then he got up. Her clothing, the original clothing, patched now where he'd cut through it to reach the wound, washed and dried, over the past 2 weeks, was gone. His spare shirt sat folded neat on the cot. On the table, where the second bracelet should have been, because she'd woven a second, a matched pair, he'd seen her working on it 2 nights back, and hadn't asked, there was nothing. Empty table. He looked at the door. Then at his own wrist. The bracelet she'd made him on the 7th day. Still there. Still on. He picked up his coffee cup, cold, from the night before, and sat at the table, with it in both hands, and outside, the sky began to lighten, into that particular blue-gray Arizona war, before the sun arrived, when the land looked less like a real place, and more like a memory of one. He sat there a long while. A man alone in a cabin. 1 coffee cup. 1 bracelet. And the specific, particular weight of something that had happened, and was, for now, over. Because that was the thing about it. It wasn't finished. He understood that much, sitting there in the gray early light. It wasn't finished at all. It had only just started. 5 years is a long time. Long enough to stop listening for hoofbeats that aren't coming. Long enough to stop glancing at the door when the wind moves it wrong. Long enough to convince yourself you've made peace with a thing. Emery Calloway was 32 years old. He had not made peace with it. But he had gotten good at pretending. The territory had changed around him, while he stayed more or less the same shape. The railroad had pushed south out of Tucson, and new towns had sprung up along the line, loud and quick, and full of men, who arrived already certain of their own importance. Fences had gone up across land that used to be open clean to the horizon. Water rights had become the thing men fought over now, more than cattle, more than grazing, more than almost anything else a man could hold in his hands. Silas Merrow had thrived in all of it. That was the word people used. Thrived. His land office had spread into 3 counties. His name sat on water contracts, on grazing agreements, on the masthead of a small Tucson newspaper that ran, with suspicious regularity, stories about the need for firm handling of what it called the Apache problem. Firm handling. Emery had read that phrase exactly once, off a paper left on the counter at the feed store, and had set it back down, and never picked up another copy since. Some words you didn't need twice. He'd bought the cabin by then. Not the Brennan spread, he was done with Brennan the day the man rode off 5 years back, done in every way that mattered, even though he'd stayed on another 8 months, because leaving fast would have looked like guilt, and he had none of that to spare. He'd saved what he could, quietly, the way a man saves, when he's got something to prove to nobody but himself. 20 acres, east of the old Brennan line. Small. His. He'd stood in the empty shell of the cabin the afternoon the papers were signed, and felt something he didn't have an easy name for. Not pride exactly. Closer to weight. The good kind. The kind that means you're finally standing on ground that can't be pulled out from under you by a man with better handwriting than conscience. He'd run a proper water line up from the creek. Extended the fence on the north side. Built a second stall onto the barn for a horse he traded into 2 winters back. He hadn't changed much else. The drawer in the bedside table still held what it had always held. He didn't open it often. But he never once thought about getting rid of what was inside it. The day she came back was an ordinary day. That was the thing about the days that mattered most. They never announced themselves. They dressed exactly like every other day, and then somewhere in the middle of them, they took off the disguise, and you realized, too late to brace for it, that you'd already walked straight into something that was always going to happen. He'd spent the morning moving stock to the north pasture, where a late rain 2 weeks back had left the grazing marginally less pitiful. Fixed a stretch of the barn roof that had started letting in weather. Ate lunch alone at the table, the way he ate every meal, looking out at that particular gold quality of Arizona afternoon light he'd stopped noticing was beautiful somewhere around year 3. And had recently, without deciding to, started noticing again. He was at the front fence in the late afternoon when he heard it. Hoofbeats. From the south. He straightened. Waited. Because a man learns the sound of a horse, that means trouble, and the sound of one, that doesn't, and this one he didn't know yet. But something in his chest already did. A dun mare came up over the rise, moving with purpose. Not an errand horse. Not somebody passing through. The horse of a person who knew exactly how to care for an animal, and exactly where she was going. The rider dismounted at the gate. A woman. Back straight. Face turned slightly from the low sun. Wearing clothes that didn't fully belong to one world or the other, traditional beadwork along the collar and sleeve of a riding jacket that was, otherwise, about as practical as anything a person could put on in this territory. Hair down. Dark. Catching the wind off the eastern ridge like it had been waiting 5 years for the chance. She turned toward him. And Emery Calloway, who had not been surprised by a single thing in roughly 4 years, felt every thought in his head clear out at once. Like a shelf tipped sideways. Everything sliding off. She walked toward the fence. He didn't move. Couldn't have, probably, if the barn had caught fire behind him right that second. She stopped on the other side of the gate. Looked at him, with those eyes he had never once, not for a single day in 5 years, fully stopped seeing, when he closed his own. "Remember me, Cowboy?" He didn't answer right away. Because the answer was so obvious it barely qualified as a question. Because he'd thought about her enough times across 5 years, that her face had worn a path into his memory the way water wears a path into stone. Not through one dramatic moment. Through repetition. Through the accumulation of ordinary returns, over and over, at the edge of every quiet afternoon. He looked at her. Then he looked down at his own wrist. The bracelet was there. Worn thinner now. Frayed at 2 points, where he'd had to tie it back rather than take it off. Faded where the sun had gotten at it most. Still on. "I kept it," he said. Her gaze dropped to it. Came back up to his face. Something moved behind her eyes, quick, there and gone. "I know," she said. And then she reached into the saddlebag on her right side and produced something that stopped his breath cold, and it had nothing to do with the heat. The matching bracelet. Not from a drawer. Hers. The one she'd taken, with her 5 years back, in the dark, before the sun was even thinking about coming up. She had kept it too. She held it between them a moment, then tucked it away again and said, "We need to talk." They sat at the same table. Same 2 chairs. Same window looking out at the same eastern ridge. Different people sitting in those chairs now, but the table hadn't cared. It just sat there being a table, the way tables do, indifferent to everything that happens across their surface. He made coffee. Old habit. Something to do with his hands while the rest of him recalibrated. She told him what had happened. What was happening. In 5 years, her English had gone from careful to something close to precise. She still chose her words, with the same economy she'd had in this cabin the first time, but the supply behind the economy was enormous now, and she knew exactly where every piece fit. She'd gone back to her people 3 days after leaving him, found by a search party already well enough to travel on her own strength. Had spent the years since doing what she'd apparently been building toward even before the desert put a bullet in her. Learning the law, specifically how it worked out here, how it was written, and how the gap between those 2 things was, where men like Marrow did the bulk of their damage. She'd studied under a lawyer in Tucson, a man named Win Ashford, who'd come west, with genuine convictions about treaty law, and no illusions at all about how rarely those convictions won. And this part she said slower, watching his face while she said it. She trained under the band's elder healer too. 2 kinds of knowing. Both necessary. Emery listened, and while he listened, he thought. She is not the woman who lay on that cot unable to sit without pain. Same bone structure. Same eyes. But everything she'd held in careful reserve back then, the intelligence, the will, the particular quality of certainty, that had always lived underneath the fear, all of it had come up to the surface now. Become the visible thing instead of the hidden one. She was 27 years old. And she was, without question, the most complete person he'd stood in a room with in 5 years. "There's more," he said. Not a question. "I guess. There's more," she agreed. "The writers that came here 5 years ago wanted me back from Marrow." She said it flat. No drama in it, which somehow made it worse. "He was trying to force a land sale my father wouldn't sign. Wanted me as leverage. Or dead, if leverage didn't work fast enough." Emery's jaw went tight. And now? Now he doesn't need leverage. She reached into a leather case at her feet, pulled out a folded document, laid it flat between the coffee cups. Now he has paper that says the land was never ours to begin with. Emery looked down at it. A survey map. Careful ink. Official stamps in the corner. "That's not right," he said before he'd even finished reading it. "No," she agreed. "It isn't." He traced the boundary line with one finger. Something in the shape of it nagged at him, familiar, but wrong, like a face you know, from a different angle than you're used to seeing it. "I rode fence through the eastern edge of your territory," he said slowly. "Summer of '81. Different outfit. And again in '84 after you." He stopped. Started over. "I know those landmarks. That spring source. The rock formation the boundary's supposed to run off of." "I know," she said. "That's why I came to you." He looked up. "You knew that when you rode out here?" "Yes." "You didn't come back just to." He stopped again. Because he wasn't sure what the end of that sentence was supposed to be, or whether he wanted to know the answer more than he was afraid of it. She held his gaze steady. "Both things can be true," she said. "I came back because of the case. And I came back because I never stopped intending to." He sat with that a long moment. Outside, the light was starting to slant gold across the yard the way it always did this time of day, the way he'd started noticing again, without knowing why, and now he knew exactly why. And it was sitting across the table from him with a survey map, and 5 years of quiet, deliberate patience folded into every line of her posture. "All right," he said. Tell me the rest. She did. The band's petition had gone before the Territorial Council twice already. Both times, Merrow's lawyers had buried it in procedural objections filed the same week, like they had a man inside the council office feeding them the calendar. Probably did, Tawny said. Men like Merrow always had a man inside somewhere. What they needed now was a witness outside the band. Someone the council couldn't dismiss as having an obvious stake in the outcome. Someone who'd actually ridden the land, who could speak to where the real boundary sat, before Merrow's surveyors got creative with their instruments. You came to me, Emery said. I came to you. A pause. I came back, she said. And the way she said it this time was different. Steady still. But with something underneath the steadiness he was very carefully not examining too closely, not yet, not with her sitting 3 feet away, and the whole shape of the last 5 years still settling into place around him. Because of the testimony, he said. She held his gaze. Among other reasons, she said. He said yes. Not right away, not without sitting with it the length of 1 full cup of coffee, and most of a second, but yes. He knew what it cost saying it. Knew Merrow had eyes in every county office in 3 directions, and a working understanding with half the men who wore a badge in the territory. Knew that a 32-year-old rancher, with 20 acres, and 1 good horse, and no family left to speak of wasn't exactly standing on a mountain of leverage against a man like that. He knew all of it. Said yes anyway. Because some decisions aren't really decisions by the time you get to them. Some of them got made 5 years ago, in a cabin, over a cup of water held out, with 2 shaking hands, and you've just been walking toward the saying of it ever since. She didn't stay in the cabin. That was her decision, made before she'd even ridden up. She had arrangements with a family 7 miles south, a homestead run by a man named Boyd Cutler, and his Apache wife, people used to living comfortably in 2 worlds at once. She told him this plainly, and then, because she was a woman who preferred honesty to whatever the alternative was called, she added, Was that for your sake or mine? He thought about it. Both, I imagine. She almost smiled. I can respect that. The next morning she came back at 7, and they got to work. She'd brought documents in, that same leather case, organized, worn soft at the corners from handling. Copies of the original treaty language. Records of the band's presence on the land going back decades, some of it handwritten testimony from elders, translated and notarized by Ashford himself. Emery wasn't a lawyer. Wasn't educated much past what a small East Texas schoolhouse could offer a boy in the 1870s, functional, not fancy. But he could read, and he could understand plainly enough what he was reading. And what he read in those pages was not ambiguous. The land had been occupied continuously. The treaty guaranteed specific use rights, spelled out in language too plain to argue with. Merrow's transfer claim rested on a survey that referenced a boundary line, and when Emery set that line beside the original treaty map, the discrepancy jumped straight off the page at him. 8 miles. Not a rounding error. Not a careless hand. A very deliberate, very precise piece of dishonesty, moved just far enough east to swallow the water source whole, without looking, to an untrained eye, like anything but ordinary surveyor's imprecision. He set the papers down. Looked up at her. This isn't a mistake, he said. No, she said. It isn't. Your lawyer seen this? Yes. He says it's sufficient to challenge the transfer in territorial court, if we have a witness who can speak to the discrepancy independently. Someone who rode that land before the survey existed. She paused. Someone the council can't accuse of having a personal stake. He looked at the 8 miles of stolen distance sitting flat on the page between them. And something old in him, something that had been quiet a long time, quiet since a rented room in Texas, and a father, who died of having the ground taken out from under him, sat up straight, and did not lie back down. Where's the company registered? He asked. Quiet. Careful. Marrows. What's it called on paper? Tawny frowned slightly, pulled another document from the case. Territorial Development and Rail Holdings, she said. Why? Just checking something. She watched him a moment. Didn't push. But he pushed himself. That night, alone, by lamplight, he went digging through an old strongbox he hadn't opened in longer than he wanted to think about. Found what he was looking for near the bottom. His father's papers. What was left of them. Yellowed now, the ink gone soft at the edges. The transfer document. 15 years old. The one that had taken the family's Texas acreage clean out, from under a man who'd worked it honest his whole life. He read the company name on it by lamplight, and his hands went very still. Territorial Development and Rail Holdings, Southern Division. Same name. Different state. Same smooth hand behind the ink. He sat there a long time. Didn't move. Didn't breathe right for a stretch. Because it wasn't a coincidence. Couldn't be. Companies like that didn't just happen to reuse a name across 2 states, and 15 years by accident. Which meant the same operation, maybe the same men, maybe just the same appetite wearing new coats, had taken his father's land, and was now reaching for hers. Which meant this had never been 2 separate griefs. It had always been one. He sat with that until the lamp burned low, and something in his chest, that had gone quiet a long time ago, woke up entirely, and did not sound anything like grief anymore. It sounded like a decision already made. The next morning, he told her. Set both papers on the table, the old one, brittle and yellowed, and the new one, crisp with Marrow's ink still fresh. Slid them side by side. She read them both. Slow. Careful. Looked up at him. This is the company that took your family's land. Same name. Same kind of paper. Different state, different year, same trick. His voice came out rougher than he meant it to. My father spent 2 years writing letters nobody answered. Died 2 years after that. Doctor never could put a proper name to what killed him. I always figured it was having the ground pulled out from under him. Never had proof it was more than a feeling. And now I've got the company name in writing. Twice. He looked at her. This isn't just your fight anymore, Tawny. It never really was only yours to begin with. Something moved across her face, understanding, and underneath it, something that looked almost like relief. Like she'd been carrying the weight of asking him for help alone, and hadn't realized, until this second, that he'd already been carrying half of it, longer than she knew, without either of them saying so. I'm sorry, she said quietly. About your father. I'm not looking for sorry. He said it plain, not unkind. I'm looking for the same thing you are. I just didn't know it had a name, until this morning. They worked through the morning, after that was something different in the room. Not just partnership anymore. Something closer to a shared debt, owed to 2 different pieces of ground 15 years, and half a country apart, finally being called due at the same table. They worked through the morning. She asked precise questions. He gave precise answers. She wrote in a narrow, careful hand that moved, he noticed with some surprise, faster than his own. At noon she brought food, from a bag, dried meat, flatbread, dried fruit, and set it on the table between them, and he noticed the echo of 5 years back in the gesture, and said nothing about it. They ate. And because they were 2 people who'd once spent 2 weeks in a cabin together in total, uncomplicated honesty, and because 5 years had changed them both in ways that made honesty feel more natural now instead of less, the conversation moved. She told him about Ashford. About 2 years spent learning law in a city that wasn't sure it had room for her, a condition she'd concluded early on was simply going to be her operating environment no matter where she went, and had therefore stopped spending energy resenting. He told her about buying the land. About the specific quiet of owning something instead of working for a man who owned it. About the way the ground looked different once it was yours, in ways he hadn't expected, and still didn't have full words for. She went quiet a moment after that. Yes, she said. I know that difference. He heard what she meant. The difference between land that was yours by choice, and land that was yours before choice was even a concept you needed, and then one day the belonging itself got contested, and the contesting became the whole reality, and the original plain fact of belonging got buried under paperwork, and hearings, and the specific exhaustion of having to prove something that was never supposed to need proving in the first place. Something tightened in his chest. And he understood, with a clarity that surprised him, that this had stopped being only about testimony somewhere in the last hour. It was about whether the world could be made to see what was actually, plainly true. Whatever this costs me, he thought. That's worth spending. Word reached town fast. The way it always did. Emery went in on the 5th day, because he needed supplies, and because he'd decided that going about his business plainly was both the honest thing and the smart thing. He wasn't hiding. Wasn't sorry. He needed flour and nails, and he intended to get them. The general store was run by a man everybody called Skinner, not his real name, hadn't been for as long as anyone could remember. Gray hair, spectacles, an opinion about everything, within 30 miles of him. He'd already seen the dun mare tied outside the cabin twice riding past on his own errands, and by the time Emery walked in, the whole shape of the story had clearly made its way around the counter twice over. He looked at Emery a beat too long, when he walked in. "Heard you had company," Skinner said. "Had a guest helping, with some land research," Emery said. "Apache guest." "A guess," Emery said. Skinner set the flour on the counter, slow, deliberate. "People are going to talk. People talk regardless," Emery said. "Costs the same either way. Might as well have actually done something worth talking about." Skinner looked at him, over the spectacles, a long moment. "You know who she is?" "Not a question." "I know who she is. Merrow's going to hear." "Merrow's going to hear," Emery agreed. He put his money on the counter. Picked up the flour. Skinner watched him the whole way to the door. "You're a stubborn man, Emery Calloway," he said. "Been told that before," Emery said, and walked out into the sun. What Emery wouldn't know until, that evening, was that the general store gossip was the least of it. What he didn't know was that Roan Hargrove had already been out to see Merrow. Hargrove had been a deputy since '85. Before that, he and Emery had crossed paths twice, working the same cattle drive south from the Mogollon Rim, and had settled into the particular kind of friendship trail work produces, not intimate, not the sort that survives real disagreement, but genuine in its way. Built on the plain knowledge that the other man would do what he said he'd do. Emery had trusted him the uncomplicated way you trust someone who hasn't yet given you a specific reason not to. He found out about the visit to Merrow on the 6th day, from a woman riding south past the cabin toward the Cutler place, who stopped at the fence and said quiet, no preamble at all. "Your deputy friend rode out to the Merrow land office yesterday. Spent 2 hours there." Then she rode on. Emery stood at the fence a long moment. Then went inside. Tawny was at the table. Read his face before he said a word. "What?" Hargrove went to Merrow. She was quiet. "How much does he know about what we're doing?" she asked. "Only that I'm helping someone with a land case." "I didn't give him particulars." "He knows enough," she said. "Yes." She looked out the window. "How much do you trust him?" Emery thought about that honestly. Really thought about it, the way you think about a thing you don't want to get wrong. "I trusted him before yesterday," he said. She nodded. "Then we move faster," she said. "And we trust fewer people." The question of trust was the one that cracked everything else open. Because trust wasn't abstract out here. It had a face, and a name, and sometimes a badge. And once you understood that a man like Hargrove, a decent man, a man who never given cause for doubt, could be worked on slow and quiet by pressure that had nothing to do with money, you started to understand exactly how much rope Merrow had, and how far it could reach. Hargrove came to the cabin himself 2 days later. Rode in from the east, avoiding the main road, which was its own kind of message. Emery met him at the fence. Tawny stayed inside, her decision, and she could hear, from there well enough. Hargrove tied his horse, and looked at Emery the way men look at each other right before they say something they'd rather not have to. "You need to stop this," Hargrove said. "Hello, Roan." "I mean it, Emery." "I know you do." A pause. "Why?" "Because Marrow knows," Hargrove said. "He knows she's here. Knows about the documents. Has a man inside the council office who tells him what's been filed. Ashford's name on anything's like ringing a bell for him." He stopped. "You understand what I'm saying?" "I understand what you're saying," Emery said. "What did he offer you?" Hargrove went quiet. "I'm not asking to make you feel bad," Emery said. "I'm asking because I need to know what he thinks this information's worth to him." "He didn't offer money," Hargrove said finally. "He offered to not make trouble for my brother in Pima County. There's a water rights dispute. My brother's ranch is hanging on it." Emery understood the mechanics of that instantly. Marrow didn't buy people mostly with cash. He bought them, with leverage, the particular pressure of "I can make your problem worse than it already is," and the fix costs you almost nothing at all. "What did you tell him?" Emery asked. "Told him I'd look into it." Hargrove's jaw worked. "Then I came here. And then you came here." They stood looking at each other a long moment. "I'm not going to pretend I'm not in a bad position," Hargrove said. "I am in a bad position. But I'm not going to lie to you about what I did, or what I'm being asked to do." "That's something," Emery said. "Not much." "No," Emery agreed. "But it's something." Hargrove looked past him, toward the cabin. "The woman in there," he said. Stopped. Tried again. "Is this just the land case, or is this more than that?" Emery held his gaze steady. "Both," he said. Hargrove was quiet a long moment. "Lord Emery," he said. "Not unkind. Just tired." "I know. This is going to get a lot worse, before it gets better." "I know that too," Emery said. Hargrove untied his horse, climbed up. "I'm going to go tell Marrow I warned you off," he said. "Which is true. I did warn you off. What you do with the warning's your business." "Thank you," Emery said. Hargrove looked at him a moment longer. "Be careful," he said, and rode east. Emery stood at the fence until the dust settled. Then went inside. Tawny stood at the window, not pretending she hadn't heard. "He's not going to hold long," she said. "I know. Marrow will put more pressure on him." "I know." She turned from the window. "Are you all right?" He thought about it, really thought about it, the way she taught him to sit, with a question instead of rushing past it. "He's not a bad man," Emery said. "He's just in a position where being good costs him something he can see plain, and doing the other thing only costs him something he can't see yet. Most men are that way." "I know," she said. "Doesn't make it easier." She was quiet a moment. "The petition," she said finally. "I need 2 more days to prepare your testimony properly. Can you be ready?" He looked at this woman, who had ridden back across 5 years of distance, with the matching bracelet still in her saddlebag, and said the only thing there was left to say. "Yes." Elder Taji came the next afternoon. Alone, which was itself significant, a man of his age, and standing traveling, without company meant he'd chosen to make this a private visit, not a tribal one. Emery saw him coming, from a distance, and went out to the fence to meet him, with the kind of respect a man learns fast, once he understands, whose time he's asking for. Taji dismounted slow. Not a large man. Slight, actually, with the particular economy of movement of someone who'd spent decades not wasting effort. Face deeply lined. Eyes unhurried. "She is well," Taji said. not a question. She's well, Emery said. Taji nodded. He didn't ask to come inside. Stood where he was, looking out at the land around the cabin, quiet long enough that Emery understood the quiet was intentional, and waited through it. I came to see for myself, Taji said finally. See what? What kind of man you are, Taji said. Now. Not 5 years ago. Emery thought about several answers to that. Settled on the honest one. I don't know how to prove that to you in an afternoon, he said. I can only tell you I'm not going anywhere. Taji looked at him a long moment. I have one question, he said. All right. What will you lose, Taji said, if you stand with us? Emery didn't answer right away. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because the question deserved the weight of a real one, not a fast one. He thought about the land. 20 acres, the cabin that was his, the fences he'd built, with his own hands, over 5 years of slow accumulation. He thought about his standing in the community, such as it was, not much, but something. He thought about Brennan, and the feed store, and the particular quality of attention powerful men give to small men, who become inconvenient. Everything I have now, he said. Nothing I couldn't rebuild. Taji looked at him a long moment. Didn't say whether the answer satisfied him. Didn't say anything at all. He got back on his horse, and rode south, and Emery stood at the fence, and watched him go, and thought, I hope that was right. I believe it was right. But I genuinely cannot tell from his face. The fire came on the 11th night. Not the cabin. The barn. Emery woke to the smell of smoke at 2 in the morning, that particular sharp wrongness, that pulls a body out of deep sleep faster than any sound could. He was moving before he was fully awake. Got the horses out first. Chalk fighting him at the rope, eyes rolling white, with the smell of it, and Emery hauled him clear, before going back for the second horse, coughing already, the heat coming off the structure in waves he could feel, from 30 feet out. He fought the fire, with buckets from the creek. 2 at a time, running the same 40 yards over and over, until his arms stopped feeling like they belonged to him. Barely, kept it from spreading into the dry brush beyond the fence line. Didn't save the barn. He stood afterward, and watched it burn down to its bones, no one around, but he knew, the same cold certain way you know a fence post is rotten, before you touch it, that the fire hadn't started itself. Hadn't been sparks off the wood stove, or any accident of weather. Set deliberate. Set at the base, in a spot no natural cause could reach. He knew who'd sent the message. He stood there in the smoke-thick dark, shirt soaked through, with creek water, and felt something settle into his chest that was colder and quieter than anger. Not fear. Closer to a decision, already made, that hadn't finished announcing itself yet. Which was exactly when the second sound came. Not fire. Hoofbeats. Fast, from the tree line north of the burned structure, somebody who'd stayed to watch, or hadn't gotten clear in time, and was making a run for it now that the job was done. Emery didn't think. Didn't have time to. He was already moving. Because if there was a man out there who'd set that fire, then there was a man out there who could tell him exactly who'd paid for it. And exactly how many more of these nights were still coming. He caught Chalk's lead rope, where he tied it loose to the fence post, swung up bareback, no saddle, no time, and went after the sound in the dark, with nothing but instinct, and the faint gray outline of scrub brush to steer by. The rider ahead of him wasn't expecting pursuit. That much was clear inside 100 yards. The horse ahead was moving fast, but sloppy, a man who'd planned an escape route for a burning barn, and hadn't planned on somebody chasing him bareback, through mesquite in the pitch dark like his life depended on it. Because it did. Because Emery's life depended on knowing who was behind this. Because he wasn't losing another piece of ground to a man in a good coat, with clean paperwork. Not again. Not after Texas. Not after his father's rented room, and the 2 years of unanswered letters. Not while there was still breath in him to do something about it. The gap closed. Emery came up alongside just past the second wash, close enough to see the rider's shoulder in the starlight, close enough to grab, and he did, hand fisting hard, into a jacket collar, and the two of them went down together off the horses, hitting the dry ground hard enough to knock the wind clean out of both of them. The other man scrambled first. Emery was faster. Had him pinned, before he'd finished drawing the breath to shout, forearm across the man's throat, knee in his chest, close enough now to see his face in the starlight, young, scared, not one of the men Emery recognized, from Purdy's crew, which meant Merrow was hiring wider now. Hiring careless. "Who sent you?" Emery said. Low. Flat. The man's eyes were wide, whites showing all around. I just do what I'm told, I don't know nothing." "Who?" "Purdy." "It was Purdy, he said Merrow wanted a message sent, that's all I know, I swear, I just lit it." "That's enough," Emery said. Because he had it now. Confirmation, straight from a scared man's mouth in the dark, that this wasn't rumor, or suspicion anymore. This was Merrow's hand, direct, on a fire, that could have killed him in his sleep, if the smoke had reached the cabin instead of the barn. He hauled the man up by the collar, marched him back toward the smoldering ruin of the barn, tied his hands, with a length of rope off the fence, and sat him down hard against the one post still standing. "You're going to tell that to a territorial council," Emery said. "Or you're going to sit here till the deputy comes, and tell it to him instead. Your choice which order." The man said nothing. But he didn't argue either. And in the not arguing, Emery understood he'd have his witness, one way or another, by morning. He looked out at the ruined barn. At the gray coming up in the east already, faster than he wanted it to. Rebuilding, he thought. Again. Always rebuilding. But not alone this time. That was the whole difference between now and Texas, now and his father's 2 years of unanswered letters. He wasn't standing in the ashes by himself. Tawny was there, when he came back, with the bound man in tow. Had smelled the smoke, come running, helped fight the last of it, with a blanket beating at the edges the way somebody taught her a long time ago, in a life he'd never fully see the shape of. She looked at the man tied against the fence post. Looked at Emery, soot-streaked, hands scraped raw. "Still rebuilding," she said, quiet. He heard what she meant, the thing he told Elder Taji, standing at this same fence days back. "Nothing I couldn't rebuild." "Still rebuilding," he said. She reached out. Didn't say she was sorry. Just put her hand flat against the side of his face for a moment, brief and steady, and something in that touch said more than an apology ever could have. "This isn't your fault," he said. "It's connected to me. It's connected to Merrow. There's a difference." She looked at him a long moment. Didn't argue. But she didn't step back either. Stood there beside him in the ash-smelling dark, looking at where the barn used to be, and there was something in the quality of that standing together that was different from anything that had happened between them 5 years back. Less careful now. More chosen. Hargrove came at first light, drawn by the smoke visible for miles, and found Emery sitting on an overturned bucket, with a bound, scared young man propped against a fence post, and a confession already half out of him. Hargrove looked at the scene a long moment. Looked at Emery. Looked at Tawny, standing steady at his side. "Lord," Hargrove said, quiet. "He's yours to take in," Emery said. "He'll tell you who sent him. Already told me." Hargrove crouched in front of the bound man, studied his face, and something in his own expression shifted, hardened, in a way Emery hadn't seen from him before. "Purdy," the man said before Hargrove even asked. "It was Purdy. Merrow's man." Hargrove stood slow. Looked out at the burned barn a long moment. "I went to Merrow's office," he said, not looking at either of them. "Told myself I was just gathering information. Protecting my brother." He shook his head once short. "Man doesn't burn another man's barn over information." "No," Emery said. He doesn't. Hargrove was quiet a long time. I'm not ready to say what I'll do about this, he said finally. I've got my brother to think about still. But I'm not going to pretend anymore that staying quiet keeps my hands clean. It doesn't. Never did. He hauled the bound man up, walked him toward his horse. I'll hold him, Hargrove said. Get a proper statement. Whatever you two are building. He stopped at his horse, looked back once. Build it fast. Because after this, Merrill's not going to wait for anybody to catch up to him. He rode off, with his prisoner, and Emery and Tawny stood together in the wreckage of the morning, the sun climbing hard, and orange over the eastern ridge exactly the way it always did, indifferent to everything that had happened underneath it in the dark. We filed the petition this week, Tawny said. We file it, Emery agreed. She looked at him. At the soot on his face, the raw scrape along his knuckles, the bracelet still tied fast to his wrist, through all of it. Whatever comes next, she said. Whatever comes next, he said back. Some things, he was learning, didn't need the second half of the sentence. Behind them, the barn smoked quiet, into the morning air, and ahead of them, somewhere in Tucson, in an office, with good coats, and clean paperwork, a man was about to find out that the ground he thought he'd already won was nowhere near as settled as he believed. 3 days after the fire, they came for him. Not Purdy this time. 2 men in good coats, the kind that don't wrinkle, from riding, the kind that cost more than a season's wages. They had a warrant. They had a judge's signature at the bottom of it, clean and looping, and entirely unfamiliar to Emery. They had, apparently, all the time in the world. Emery Calloway, the taller one said. You're under arrest. Interfering with lawful territorial land proceedings. Emery looked at the paper. Looked at the 2 men. Looked past them, toward the road, where nothing moved except heat coming up off the dirt and long silver ribbons. He thought about running. Dismissed it. Fast. Because running meant leaving. And leaving meant the petition lost its only witness, who was an Apache, which meant every single thing Tawny had built, 5 years of it, maybe longer, came apart in his hands the second he put his own boot in the stirrup and rode. So he didn't run. Let me put the horse up first, he said. They let him. Small mercy. He led Chalk back to the fence, unsaddled him slow, made sure the feed was where it needed to be, and the whole time his mind was doing that thing it did now, when trouble showed up, running through what she'd do, what she'd need, what pieces were already in motion, that his arrest couldn't stop even if it wanted to. She'll come to the cabin. Find Chalk. Know me. She'll understand exactly what happened before anybody tells her a word of it. She won't wait. He went back inside, before they walked him out. Opened the drawer by the bed. Took the bracelet off his wrist, just for a moment, just long enough to feel strange, without it, and set it inside, next to the second one, the one wrapped careful in cloth, that had sat there 5 years already. Both of them together. For now. He closed the drawer. Then he went, with the 2 men, hands loose at his sides, jaw set the way it got set, when a thing was happening to him that he couldn't fix by working harder at it. The jail in the county seat wasn't much of a building. 1 room split into cells, 2 of which already had occupants, who looked like their trouble had started at the bottom of a bottle, and hadn't finished yet. Emery got the cell by the window, because either of the other men wanted the afternoon light cutting straight into their eyes. He sat on the bench, watched the light move, and thought about her. Because that was the whole trouble, was sitting in a cell, with nothing to do. There was room in his head for exactly one thing, and it wasn't the charge against him, and it wasn't the 2 smooth men who delivered it. It was her. Standing at the cabin door in 5 years' worth of borrowed light, saying "Remember me, Cowboy," like she already knew the answer, and just wanted to watch his face catch up to it. I cannot do anything from here, he thought. And then, right behind it, quieter, she can. Word reached the Cutler homestead before dark. A neighbor rode south, with the particular look of a man delivering news he already knew wouldn't land soft. Emery Calloway. County Jail. Warrant signed by Judge Eustace Pell. Tawny took it standing. Didn't move. Didn't ask him to repeat it. Thanked the rider. Watched him go. Then she went inside, and sat down at the table, where Emery's testimony documents were still spread out, his handwriting across the pages, careful, unhurried, the handwriting of a man who meant exactly what he wrote, and never wrote more than he meant. She looked at that handwriting a long time. Then she started planning. Not panicking. Panic was a luxury, and grief was for later, and right now there was exactly one thing that mattered. Emery was in a cell, because he'd stood beside her, and Merrill's lawyers were already moving to bury the whole case, before it saw a hearing room. She had, by her own count, 4 days. Maybe less. She'd worked with less before. The first thing she did was write to Ashford. Not a frightened letter. A precise one, 3 pages laying out exactly what had happened, exactly what documents existed, exactly what she needed from him inside 72 hours. She sealed it, sent it with the Cutler family's eldest son, and specific instructions about speed. Then she went to bed. Because tomorrow needed everything she had, and lying awake spending that on fear would be a waste she couldn't afford. She was 27 years old. She had been readying herself for some version of this, since she was 22, since a rock face, and a bullet, and a cowboy, who hadn't asked a single question, before laying his coat over her. She slept. The second thing she did was go to the jail. Not to break him out. To see him. Because there were things that needed confirming, before she could move the next pieces, and because he needed to know, plainly, that she was still there. She arrived before the heat got serious. The young deputy on duty stared at her a long moment, then at the cells, then back at her, clearly unprepared for his morning to include this. "I need to speak with Emery Calloway," she said. He didn't move. "I need to speak with Emery Calloway," she said again. Same tone. Same volume. The particular patience of a person who will say a sentence exactly as many times as it takes. He got up. Led her back. Emery heard her before he saw her. Knew the sound of it, the rhythm of how she moved, purposeful, unhurried, exactly her own pace no matter what was happening around her. She appeared at the cell door. He stood. Neither of them said anything for a moment. She looked at him the way she'd looked at everything in that cabin 5 years back. Taking inventory. Checking the condition of what stood in front of her. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Have they charged you formally?" "Not yet. They will this afternoon." The language suggests interfering with proceedings. It's thin. But thin holds a man 3 to 5 days. "I know. I wrote to Ashford. Figured you would." She looked at him a beat longer than the words needed. "Are you all right?" Second time she'd asked him that in 17 days. Both times meaning something wider than the words carried. "I'm fine," he said. "Are you?" Almost a smile. "I'm working." "I know." "Emery," she said, "don't wait on my account. Do what needs doing." "I know that." "I know you know," he said. Saying it anyway. She held his gaze a moment. Then she put her hand through the bars. Not dramatic. Not a grand gesture. Just her hand, in the narrow space between them. He put his against it. Brief. Specific. Enough. She took her hand back. 3 days, she said. Maybe 4. I'll be here. She turned and walked back toward the front of the jail, and Emery sat down slow on the bench, and felt something he hadn't felt in 5 years of getting on fine by himself, or 17 days of shared purpose, or in any of the wide empty spaces between. Felt, specifically, like he wasn't alone in a thing. Which was different. Entirely different. From simply having company. The third thing she did was the one that mattered most. She rode south to the Copper Spring camp, 3 hours in full afternoon heat, arriving in the last light, with dust ground into her jacket, and her hair come loose from the wind, and the exact look of a woman who's already decided something, and has ridden this far to say it out loud. Elder Taji met her at the edge of camp. "They took him," he said. "I heard. I need the band's formal authorization," she said, "to add the secondary documentation to the petition. The 1883 attack. Yes. The survey case alone may not carry enough weight to force a proper hearing before the transfer goes through. Not now. Not with him in a cell, and Merrow's lawyers moving fast." Taji was quiet. This was the argument. The same one she and Emery had been circling since the 9th day of their work together, before the fire, before the arrest. Whether the risk of overloading the case outweighed the certainty of only a partial win. Except now Emery was in a cell. And Merrow had burned a barn to send a message. And the clock had teeth in it that hadn't been there a week ago. "You understand what happens if the hearing goes badly," Taji said. "Yes. Not just to the land. To the people who testified. To him." She didn't look away from that. "Yes. I understand all of it." Taji looked past her, out at the land stretching north, gold going to copper in the last light. "My father's father was born on that ground," he said. She waited. "My children's children will be asked to be born somewhere else," he said, "if nothing changes." "I know. Then you understand why I cannot say yes lightly. Not for the band. And not as your father, watching you carry this." "Yes," she said. "And you understand why I'm asking anyway." The desert held them both in it a long moment, the last light going amber across the red earth, wind moving through dry brush, the specific weight of a decision that could not be undecided once it was made. "You have my authorization," Taji said. Quiet. Simple. The way a man says a thing he's already been carrying a long time, and has simply been waiting for the right hour to set down. "And the councils." She didn't thank him with words. Lowered her head once, slow. He returned the gesture. She turned her horse, and rode north, into the dark, and somewhere behind her, unspoken but entirely understood, an old man sat, with the particular grief of a father giving permission to risk everything, because the alternative was losing it all anyway, slower, and with no fight in the losing at all. Ashford arrived in the county seat the second day. 60 years old, short, wearing a suit that had survived better days, with considerable dignity, and carrying the specific energy of a man who'd been told 100 times a thing couldn't be done, and had developed a healthy professional allergy to that particular sentence. He met Tawny at the county clerk's office. She spread the documents across the table. He looked at every page. Took his time. Asked 3 questions, each answered precise as a blade. Made 2 notes on a pad he kept in his breast pocket. Looked up. "You've built an unusually solid case," he said. "I know. I've been doing this 30 years, he said. "Had clients spend twice as long build half of this." "Where did you learn to do it?" She looked at him. "From you. And from necessity." He made a sound that was almost a laugh. "The secondary documentation," he said. "The raid. You want to bring it?" "Yes. It changes the character of the hearing. Merrow's lawyers will pivot to it. Try to make it the whole issue. Try to discredit it, and drag the survey case down with it." "I know," she said. "Which is why the survey evidence has to be presented first. Complete. On the record. So that even if they pivot, the survey case is already standing on its own by the time they try." Ashford studied her a long moment. "That's exactly right," he said. "It's also extremely difficult to execute." "I know that too. You'll need to carry the survey testimony yourself," he said. "I can advise. But the most powerful voice in that room won't be mine." "I know," she said. He was quiet a moment. "You're not afraid," he said. Not quite a question. She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about everything. I'm afraid of losing, she said. I'm not afraid of the room. He nodded once. Good. We have 2 days. Then we start now, she said. It was on the second night, alone, going back through the county clerk's records by lamplight, while Ashford slept the few hours he allowed himself, that she found it. A ledger. Land office filings, cross-referenced against county court appointments. The kind of dull public record nobody bothers reading, because nobody expects it to say anything. Except it did. Because there, buried in a list of shareholders behind Territorial Development and Rail Holdings, filed quiet, 3 years back, under a variation of a name she almost skipped past, Eustace Pell. The same Eustace Pell who'd signed the warrant putting Emery in a cell. She sat very still, with the ledger in front of her. Because this wasn't Marrow reaching for one favor, from one friendly judge. This was Marrow owning the bench outright. Buying it years in advance, quiet, patient, the same way he bought silence, and debt and desperate brothers, with water rights hanging by a thread. Which meant the warrant was never about the law at all. It had been about removing Emery, before the hearing. Clean and legal looking, on paper, with a judge, who had every reason in the world to make the charge stick. Her hands were steady. That surprised her, a little, distantly, the way things surprise you, when you've trained yourself past the point where fear gets to drive. She woke Ashford before dawn. He read the ledger entry twice. Set it down slow. Well, he said, and there was something almost like admiration under the exhaustion in his voice. That changes the shape of tomorrow considerably. Can we use it? Carefully, Ashford said. Filed in the record plain, without accusation attached to it directly, let the counsel draw the line themselves. A judge with an undisclosed interest in the outcome of a case connected to the defendant's arrest. He tapped the page. That's not an accusation, Tawny. That's a fact sitting, where anyone can see it. Facts are enough, she said. Facts, Ashford agreed, are usually the only thing that's ever been enough. The morning of the third day, Hargrove came to the clerk's office. Hat in his hands. The look of a man who'd spent 2 days arguing with himself and finally lost. I'll testify, he said. Tawny set down her pen. About the commissioner meetings. What I told Emery. I'll say it under oath. Your brother. I'll deal with my brother's situation some other way, Hargrove said. There's always another way. I just have to find it. Why? She said. Not unkind. Genuinely asking. He thought about it a long moment. Because Emery's in a cell, he said, for doing the right thing plain and simple. And I've been walking around free this whole time for doing a half-right thing, and calling it enough. He looked down at his hat. It's not enough. She looked at him a long moment. Sit down, she said. We need your statement in writing before this afternoon. He sat. The hearing was set for the next morning. Emery had been in the cell 3 days now. The evening before, Tawny came back one last time. The young deputy let her, through without making her ask twice, 3 days apparently being enough to change his mind privately about how he felt regarding all of this. She came to the cell. Emery stood. Tomorrow, she said. 9 o'clock. Are you ready? Yes. A pause. Ashford's good. Better than I expected. Hargrove. Her expression shifted, softened at the edge. He came in this morning. Statements signed and filed. Emery went still. I'll be damned, he said, quiet. You vouched for him, she said, even when he was in the wrong position. You didn't close the door on him. He made his own choice. Yes. But you left him room to make it. She held his eyes. How are the elders? Elder Taji authorized the secondary documentation. The council agreed. He nodded slow. There's one more thing, she said, and something in her voice tightened. The judge who signed your warrant. Eustace Pell. She watched his face carefully. He's a shareholder in Merrow's company. Filed quiet 3 years back. Emery's jaw went hard. So the warrant was never about the law. No, she said. It was about getting you out of that room before you could stand in it. He absorbed that a long moment. Can you use it? Ashford thinks so. Carefully. Then use it, he said. Whatever it costs. She almost smiled at that, the specific echo of his own line, from a cabin 5 years back, handed straight back to him now. Come back tomorrow, and tell me how it goes, he said. She looked at him. You'll be there. I'm in a cell. The hearing's open, she said. I asked the clerk. There's no legal ground to keep a subpoenaed witness from attending. Your testimony's part of the primary petition. He stared at her. You got me subpoenaed. Ashford filed the paperwork this afternoon, she said. They have to release you to testify. Holding you through it would be obstruction of a territorial council proceeding. He looked at her a long moment. Something moved through his face, not just relief. Something underneath relief, that had been building 5 years, 17 days, 3 days in a cell, and a long, long stretch of quiet, before any of that. You are extraordinary, he said. She held his gaze. I know, she said. And this time, she didn't almost smile. She smiled. They released him at 7 the next morning. The deputy brought his belt, and his hat, stood off to one side, with the specific careful blankness of a man who's decided to have no expression at all about any of this. Emery stepped out of the cell. Stood in the front room of the jail. Tawny was there. Had Chalk with her, saddled, tied at the post outside. He came into the morning light. Put on his hat. Looked at Chalk. Looked at her. My barn's gone, he said. I know. Fence is probably compromised. Probably. And Merrow's lawyers are going to try to take apart everything we built, in that room, this morning. Yes, she said. He looked at her a moment longer. Then reached into his jacket pocket. He'd carried the bracelet there, since they'd come for him, closer than the drawer, and hadn't examined the reason too hard at the time. He put it back on his wrist. Now let's go, he said. The Territorial Council hearing room took itself seriously. High ceilings. Wood-paneled walls. A long table at the front, where 3 council members sat, with the posture of men who understand that what they're about to do will be talked about for a long time after. The room was full. Emery hadn't expected that. He'd expected a half-empty room, and tired men eager to get back to their regular business. Instead, he walked into a crowd. Faces from town. Skinner from the feed store, sitting in the middle section, spectacles on his nose, expression carefully neutral in the particular way that meant he'd already formed his opinion, and was watching now only to see if the proceedings confirmed it. Members of the Copper Spring Band along the left side. Elder Taji among them, and beside him, others who'd ridden 3 hours to be here. And in the front row on the right, Silas Merrow. Emery had never seen the man in person. Big. Well-dressed, in the particular way of men, who need you to understand immediately that they can afford to be. A face that had probably been called handsome once, and that Emery found, on first look, entirely untrustworthy, the specific untrustworthiness of a face that has spent too many years performing confidence instead of earning it. 3 lawyers around him. A clerk with a stack of paper. The whole formation of a man who has never once walked into a room without an army standing behind him. Merrow looked at Emery when he came in. Emery looked back. Nothing was said. Everything was established. Tawny presented first. Emery sat in the witness area and watched her stand before the council table and felt the particular thing you feel watching someone do the exact thing they were built to do. She wasn't nervous. Wasn't even close. Feet planted. Hands still. She laid out the survey evidence in a voice clear enough to reach every corner of the room, and precise enough that even council members, who might have preferred a clean procedural exit, found no door open to them. She started with the treaty. Read the boundary language slow, plain, no room in it for a second interpretation. Then she set Merrow's survey map beside it. The discrepancy sat there, visible to the whole room. 8 miles. She didn't dramatize it. Let the two maps speak for themselves, side by side, the truth of it plain, as a fence line. One council member leaned forward. "Are you saying this survey was falsified?" "I am saying the survey does not match the original treaty boundary markers," Tawny said. "I am presenting the physical evidence. The council can draw its own conclusion." Merrow's lead lawyer stood. "These boundary questions are common in territorial surveys," he said, smooth as poured oil. "Methodology in 1883 was imprecise by nature. My client's survey used the most current. The treaty was signed in 1861, Tawny said. The boundary markers it describes are physical landmarks. A rock formation, a creek junction, a spring source. These are not subject to methodology. They are either there, or they are not." The lawyer glanced at his notes. "My client's survey," he tried again, "identifies a different rock formation as the northeastern marker." "I have a signed statement," Tawny said, "from a man who rode that land in 1881, and again in 1884, identifying that formation by its correct location. It is 14 miles south of where your survey places it." The lawyer went still. He hadn't expected that specific a detail. He had no way of knowing it had been sitting in Emery's memory since a night 2 weeks back, midnight, after an argument, after coffee gone cold, after she'd asked him to tell her everything he remembered, and he told her all of it, precise, and she'd written down every word. Emery was called next. He walked to the front. Took the oath. Saturday. Merrow's lawyer came at him first. "Mr. Calloway, you claim to have ridden the eastern section of what you're calling Copper Spring Territory in, when, exactly?" "Summer of '81, Emery said. "Different outfit than the one I work now. Again in '84. And you expect this council to believe you remember specific geographical features from 7-9 years past?" "I navigate by landmarks," Emery said. "Wasn't a skill I chose to turn off after." The lawyer shifted. "Your relationship to the petitioner," he said, changing course. "You're personally acquainted with Miss." "I am. In this relationship, she risked her life to bring this case forward. She's here to help her people get their land back," Emery said. "I'm here to help her do it right." The room went quiet a beat. Not what the lawyer had expected, clean, plain, no flourish to grab onto. He looked at his notes a long moment. Sat down. The council members glanced at each other. Emery looked at Tawny. She was looking back at him. And the expression on her face wasn't surprise. It was something closer to certainty. Like watching a thing land exactly where she'd known it would. Then Hargrove testified. Had in his hands steady voice, a man who'd decided to be honest, and wasn't looking for credit for it. Described the commissioner meetings. The documents signed after. Language that went past ordinary land business straight into what he called careful and specific, coordinated interference with the treaty review process. Merrow's lawyer objected twice. Both times Ashford answered, with the legal ground for admissibility. Both times the council ruled in his favor. Merrow, in the front row, sat very still. The very particular stillness of a man realizing, in real time, that the thing he believed could never happen was happening in front of him. Then Tawny stood again. "There is one further matter," she said. "The council should be aware of before it rules." She laid the ledger page on the table. Judge Eustace Pell, who signed the warrant for Mr. Calloway's arrest 3 days ago, is a shareholder in Territorial Development and Rail Holdings, the company filing this transfer claim. That interest was filed quietly and never disclosed. The room shifted. A low sound moved through the gathered crowd, not shouting. Just the particular hum of a lot of people arriving at the same conclusion at the same moment. Merrow's lawyer was on his feet instantly. This is entirely outside the scope of. The council is entitled to know who benefits from its rulings, Ashford said, calm, unhurried. We make no accusation. We submit the record. The lead council member held up a hand. Both lawyers went quiet. He looked at the page a long moment. Then at Tawny. You are saying, he said slowly, that the judge who ordered this man's arrest has a direct financial interest in the outcome of this very proceeding. Yes, Tawny said. The room went completely still. The kind of stillness that happens when a crowd reaches the same understanding all at once, and no one is quite ready yet to be the first to say it out loud. Merrow's lawyer started speaking again. But something had already changed in the room. You could feel it, the way you feel weather turning, before the first drop falls. The council recessed. 40 minutes. Emery and Tawny stood outside the building in the hard morning light, not talking, both of them fully aware that the next 40 minutes were entirely out of their hands, and the only thing left to do was wait. He stood beside her. She stood beside him. The street wasn't empty. People had gathered, some out from the hearing itself, some from town who'd caught wind of what was happening, and come to watch. There were looks. Of course there were looks. But there was something else moving through the street too. Not hostility, mostly. Attention. Real attention, the kind people pay when they've just watched something happen in front of them that's made them reconsider a thing they'd thought was already settled. Skinner appeared beside Emery. Said nothing a moment. She speaks well, he said finally. Yes. That map. Skinner shook his head slow. Anybody could see it plain as day. Yes, Emery said. Skinner was quiet. I sold Merrow's men feed for 2 years, he said. Didn't ask questions. A lot of people didn't ask questions, Emery said. Doesn't make it right. No, Emery said. But asking the question now's better than never asking it. Skinner nodded slow. Went back inside. Tawny stood slightly apart, face toward the street, arms at her sides. Very still. Not peace, exactly. Not fear either. The stillness of someone who's done everything there was to do, and is now standing in the narrow space between effort and outcome, which is, Emery was starting to understand, the hardest space a person can occupy, because there's nothing left in it to do, but be honest with yourself about whether it was enough. He moved to stand beside her. Whatever they decide, she said. He waited. It was the right case to make, she said. All of it. The survey. The raid. Hargrove. A pause. You. It was ours, he said. She was quiet. But her hand at her side close to his moved. Just slightly. He took it. She let him. They stood in the street outside the council building, hands together, the Arizona morning going gold around them, and the weight of the last 3 weeks, the last 5 years, if either of them let themselves count it, that far back, finally found its own place, settled somewhere between them, and waited alongside them. The council came back in 38 minutes. Everyone filed back in. Emery and Tawny sat together this time, not on opposite sides of the room. At the same table. Merrow was still in his seat. Still very still. The lead council member looked out at the room a long moment. Took his time. Then began. The transfer claim, he said, is suspended, pending formal investigation into the survey methodology and the accuracy of the boundary representations submitted. Emery heard Tawny exhale beside him. Quiet. Controlled. But he heard it. The secondary matter. The council member continued. Regarding the 1883 incident, is referred to the territorial governor's office, with a recommendation for federal review. Merrow's lawyer was on his feet immediately, objecting. The council member let him finish. Then said plain, The referral stands. That was the sentence. Not a complete ending. Not everything that needed ending ended all at once. But the thing that had been in motion, the transfer, the slow, careful paperwork erasure of people who'd stood on that ground longer than the paperwork itself had existed, that thing was stopped. Stopped today. Not forever, maybe. But today. Marrow stood when it was over. Looked at Tawny. Then, for just a moment, at Emery. It wasn't a pleasant look. But it wasn't the look of a man who still held every card either. It was the look of a man discovering, in real time, that the game he thought he'd already won had quietly changed its terms, while he wasn't watching, and he didn't yet know what those new terms were going to cost him. He left with his lawyers. The door closed behind them. That was when Hargrove leaned toward Emery, low, urgent, the relief on his face already curdling into something sharper. "Marrow's man, Purdy," Hargrove said. "He left before the ruling. 10 minutes back. Didn't wait for the verdict." Emery went cold. Because a man who leaves a hearing before the verdict isn't a man accepting the outcome. That's a man already moving on to the next thing. "Where's your brother?" Emery asked. "Fast. Home. Alone." "Why?" "Because Marrow's not going to let this end clean," Emery said, already moving. "Not with a witness like you still breathing, and willing to talk again." Hargrove's face went white. "You think he'd?" "I think a man who burns a barn over a warning doesn't stop just because a counsel tells him to." They were both moving now, out the door, into the street, and Emery swung up onto chalk without a second's hesitation, Hargrove scrambling onto his own horse beside him. "Which road?" Emery said. "North Fork. Fastest way to my brother's place." They rode hard. Because Emery had learned exactly one lesson from this entire ugly stretch of years, from Texas straight through to this morning, and it was this: men like Marrow didn't quit clean. They quit loud, or they quit dangerous, and either way somebody paid the last installment, before the door finally shut. The road blurred past. Dust and heat, and the pounding rhythm of hooves eating up the miles, and Emery's mind wasn't racing exactly, it had gone very quiet, very focused, the particular stillness that comes right before a thing has to be done fast, and right the first time. They came up on the Hargrove spread just past noon. And there, at the fence line, exactly where a man might wait for someone riding home unaware, 2 riders. Purdy among them. Rifles not drawn yet but close. Emery didn't slow. "Roan!" he shouted. "Get down!" Hargrove ducked low in the saddle on instinct alone, and Emery bore down on the 2 riders at a dead run, close enough now to see Purdy's face turn, see the surprise on it, because the last thing Purdy expected, riding out to finish a piece of unfinished business, was to find the business already riding straight at him. Emery didn't reach for a gun. He didn't need one. He rode chalk straight between the 2 horses, close enough to spook them both sideways, close enough that Purdy's mount reared hard, and threw him clean into the dirt, before he'd gotten a hand near his rifle. The second man wheeled his horse fast, saw Hargrove coming up behind, with his own weapon finally drawn, and made the only sensible choice left to him. He ran. Purdy didn't get the chance. Hargrove was off his horse, and had him pinned in the dirt, before he'd finished coughing the dust out of his lungs. "That's twice now," Emery said, standing over him, breathing hard. "Barn! And this." Purdy said nothing. Didn't need to. His face said it plain enough, caught, and knowing it, and already calculating what Marrow's silence would be worth to him now, that Marrow's silence was the only currency he had left. Hargrove looked up at Emery, from where he knelt on Purdy's back. "You saved my brother's life," he said. Quiet. Stunned by it a little. "You already saved mine," Emery said. "Told the truth when it cost you something. That's the same thing, near as I can tell." Hargrove hauled Purdy up by the collar. "This one's going to the territorial governor's office himself," he said. "Personally. Today. By evening, The story had already outrun them back to town, the way stories do in small places, growing a little truer, and a little larger, with every mile. Merrow's own hired man, caught trying to finish what the fire started, delivered straight into federal hands the same day his employer's land claim collapsed in open session. It wasn't the ending of everything. But it was the beginning of the kind of ending that actually holds. Merrow left the territory 11 days later. Quietly, without the good coats, or the fanfare, on a train headed east, and the newspaper that had once printed his name kindly printed, this time, a very different story, one about shareholders, and hidden interests, and a judge quietly removed from the bench pending his own federal inquiry. Ashford stood on the courthouse steps afterward, with the expression of a man who has won a genuinely significant case, and is carefully not celebrating yet, in case celebrating jinxed the paperwork. He shook Emery's hand, then looked at Tawny a long moment. "In 30 years," he said, "I have never seen a case built the way you built this one." She held his gaze. "Thank you," she said, "for what you taught me." He made a sound, looked away, shook his head slightly. "I taught you procedure," he said. "The rest was yours." He put his hat on, and walked toward his horse, without looking back, which was how Emery understood the man was genuinely moved, and preferred that no one notice. They rode home together, the long road north, chalk and the dun mare side by side, the desert in early afternoon harsh, and indifferent, and, in that particular hour, honestly beautiful in the way things are, when they don't require anything from you at all. "The barn," she said after a while. 2 weeks, he said. "Maybe 3. I'll help on weekends." "I know. The Cutlers would help too," she said. "And Skinner. He's been feeling guilty about the feed." Emery almost laughed. A guilt-motivated barn builder's still a barn builder. "That's true," she said. They rode on, plans stacking up between them the ordinary way plans do, when two people have decided, without needing to say it out loud, that they intend to build something together, and mean to keep building it. At the creek crossing, they stopped to let the horses drink, standing in the dappled shade of the cottonwoods, one of the only patches of real shade left in the whole territory at this hour. She reached into her saddlebag, took out the second bracelet. She held it in her palm. "When I left, in 1883, she said, "I didn't think I'd come back." He waited. "I thought I should go," she said. "Not make things harder for you. Take what you'd given me, and be grateful, and not ask for more." She looked at the bracelet. "I took this with me anyway." "I've been waiting," he said. "Didn't know that's what I was doing. But that's what it was." "I know," she said. "You always know." "Not always." A small, real smile. "But often enough." He took the bracelet from her hand, put it on her wrist himself. She looked down at it, then at his, the matched one, worn thin, still there. Both of them wearing what had always belonged to both of them, 5 years apart, and finally, at last, in the same place at the same time. Elder Taiji organized the ceremony. Didn't ask whether they wanted it. Sent word through the Cutler place that the Copper Spring Council would bear witness, 3 days hence, on the open flat ground between town's eastern edge and the territory's northern boundary, land that belonged to nothing but the sky above it. The morning of, cool the way Arizona mornings are cool only in the narrow window, before the heat remembers itself. Emery stood on that flat ground, before dawn, alone, just to be there. Just to let the place be what it was, before anyone else arrived. He thought about a loose fence post. About a summer afternoon in 1883. About a decision made in roughly 4 seconds that had, somehow, without his ever fully choosing it on purpose, become the whole shape of his life since. People arrived as the sky lightened. Copper Spring Band members, from the south, moving quiet, the way people move, when they know how to mark an occasion, without making it loud. From town, fewer, but some. Skinner in his good coat, spectacles clean for the day, standing at the back, with the look of a man making his peace with having been wrong about a few things. Hargrove, hat in his hands, saying nothing, simply present, which by now was more than enough. Tawny arrived as the first full light reached the ground. Alone, on the dun mare, moving at an easy walk. Her own clothing. Traditional beadwork worked in red and black, patterns he'd learned the way he'd learned landmarks, by heart, without ever fully deciding to. She looked like herself. Not a performance for either world. Just herself. The only version of her he had ever wanted to see. She dismounted. Walked toward him. The gathered crowd went quiet, not directed, just the particular hush that happens when attention gathers itself around something, and the noise of the world steps back on its own. She stopped in front of him. He took his hat off. Elder Taji spoke first, slow, in the copper spring tongue, the words carrying the weight of a man who'd spent decades learning exactly how to make language hold what it needed to hold. Emery didn't understand the words. He understood the intention. Then it was his turn. He wasn't a man of speeches. Never had the gift for the decorative version of anything. What he had was the true version. "I'll stand beside you," he said. "Not in front of you. Not behind you. Beside you. And when I can't stand, I'll be honest about why. And when you can't, I hope you'll tell me." A pause. "That's what I have. It's not a small thing. I don't think you'd want the small version anyway." Something moved through the gathered people. Softer than sound. Tawny spoke in her language first. A phrase whole and complete on its own, that she would later tell him meant "I choose you, with my eyes open," which means I choose you, with full knowledge of what you are. Then, in English, "I came to you once, and you kept nothing back. Not your coat. Not your house. Not your time." A pause. "I came back, because I have never met another person I could say that about. I choose you. Not because I owe you something. Because you are the person I want standing beside me, when things get hard." A small, real smile. "And I know from experience. Things get hard." He almost smiled at that. She smiled back. He put a ring on her finger. Simple silver, he'd ridden to Tucson for it, without telling her, stood in a jeweler's shop describing what he wanted to a man, who kept showing him ornate things, until he'd finally just said plain, "The simplest you have." And the jeweler had produced exactly that. Something chosen to last. Not to impress. She looked at it. Then at him. Then reached into her jacket, and produced a length of woven cord, the same red thread she'd used, that very first time, and tied it around his wrist, over the bracelet already there. A precise knot. The kind that doesn't come loose by accident. He looked at his wrist. Both things then now. The bracelet from 1883. The cord from today. Elder Taji spoke a closing phrase, formal, witnessed. And that was it. Done. The day opened up after, the way days do once the significant part inside them has already happened, and what's left is just the ordinary good of being alive in the aftermath. People talked. Copper Spring and town folks sharing the same ground in the careful, willing way of people not yet used to each other, but choosing to try anyway. Skinner shook Emery's hand, said nothing, which from Skinner meant everything. Hargrove found Tawny near the edge of the gathering. "A formidable woman," he said. "Yes," she said. He laughed, short and surprised. "Good luck to him," he said, and walked off. In the late afternoon, when most had gone, Emery and Tawny stood alone on the flat ground in the long gold light, the land around them turning the color of old copper, the particular light that explains, without needing a single word, why people who grow up out here can never fully leave, no matter how hard they try. "The barn," she said. 2 weeks. I'll help on weekends." "I know." "And the fence line next month," she said. "And the water line extension you mentioned, before all this started." "Spring," he said. She nodded. "Lists. Plans. The ordinary architecture of a life, that gets built one piece at a time, by two people who've decided to stay somewhere, and mean it. He looked at her. She was watching the eastern ridge. What are you thinking? He asked. She was quiet a moment. That it took 5 years to come back, she said. And that it was the right amount of time. A pause. And also too long. He looked at the ridge with her. Both things are true, he said. Yes, she said. She turned to look at him. He looked back. 5 years. 17 days. 3 days in a cell. 1 morning in a wood-paneled room. 1 afternoon on flat open ground, with the sky enormous above them, and a hard ride north that had ended, this time, exactly where it was supposed to. All of it, adding up to this. 2 people standing in the late light, their future laid out in practical lists, their hands close, and the particular quiet of something that has finally found the shape it was always meant to have, after a very long stretch of being wrong-shaped. He took her hand. She let him. The sun dropped below the ridge. The air went cool. And the desert, wide, old, and patient in the way only very old things know how to be patient, held them in it. The way it holds everything that chooses, finally, to stay.